Today we have another up and coming YouTube personality, Geoffrey Verity Schofield. Been following you for a little bit. You were one of the first people that stood out to me when my channel was starting to grow. You were really active, along with a couple other people in the comments. And as I don't know, I feel like as I've kind of grown, you've kind of grown, and I think you're actually pretty on pace to overtake me. Your channel's much younger than mine, and it's growing pretty fast. But it's kind of cool to see this little network of. I feel like there's a few parallel YouTube channels that are all kind of coming up at the same time, so that's kind of cool. So if you wouldn't mind, just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of what your training history is, and what kind of brought you to this point right now.
Yeah, so I guess I should start by saying, like, I haven't been that long. Like, you've probably lifted like 2 or 3 times as long as I have. And so I actually feel like I'm not an authority on anything or not an expert on anything. Like, I'm still learning. And, you see some YouTube channels, they comment on a lot of different pages, and they might not even watch the video. They just leave comments just to, like, get exposure.
Yeah.
But, like, I would leave comments in videos just because, like, I was watching them anyway. Like, I was just trying to learn about, like, especially about strength training and about, like, program design. And so I would leave a comment just because, like, I enjoyed the video and I'd watch the video. So, like, I would just leave a comment. And, so for me, it was like a very natural thing just to, like, leave a comment on pages, that I liked and channels that I really supported. But, like, as for my own, like, personal, I guess, lifting journey, I've been lifting like 7.5 years. So not a super long time by any means. And then before that, I was actually just a distance runner. So I started when I was like 150 pounds, and now I'm like upwards of 200. So it's been a productive 7 years, I guess you could say. And then I've been in the fitness industry like 3 years or so. I started writing on Quora back in 2019, and then I moved to YouTube in like 2020 or so.
Tell me about Quora, because I wasn't even really familiar with that as like a platform. I knew it was like kind of a question and answer site, but you got quite the following on that. Am I right? I heard that you had a kind of a pretty crucial threshold of views and engagement with people.
Yeah, so I have like 3,000 answers there. And,
wow.
So I used to write, like, when I first started, I guess it was sort of like the perfect platform for me because I really like helping people. And it was almost like more, I guess, a direct connection to people because, on YouTube, like, you don't really make a video for a specific person. You just, like, make a video on a topic and then people watch it, right?
Yeah.
But with Quora, like, there's a real person asking this specific question. And so, I felt like I was actually helping someone. And it ended up getting, like, pretty addictive where I was writing, like, 10 or 12 hours a day. And,
Jesus.
yeah, just, like, fervently just writing. And, eventually I sort of got away from it just because I guess I got kind of burnt out on it and I wasn't really getting anything out of it. Like, they don't really pay writers. Now there's like a program where they can pay writers, but the money is like pennies, literally pennies. So it just like wasn't really worth it to keep going. Plus, like, the question quality really diminished. So
I can imagine.
I kind of got away from that. Yeah. But it's sort of lit stuff too.
Yeah, and the amount of effort it takes, I mean, just to formulate a coherent response, even if it's only a paragraph, I mean, that takes a lot of creative energy, and it might as well funnel. Like, were you able to kind of siphon people off, or I mean, did that kind of contribute to your viewership, or was that kind of an isolated thing?
Oh, I siphoned them. I siphoned them good.
That's what I like to hear.
No, yeah, I did. Yeah. No, I really did because I remember the first like 5 months, I didn't link to any other social media. I would just write the answer and then like that was it, right? Like, and I would really get nothing out of it. And you weren't allowed to link to other social media. But eventually, I'm just like, screw it. Like, I'm providing value to the people, to this platform. Screw it. I'm just going to link And so I edited like all my answers, like 1,000 answers in one day to just link to my YouTube and Instagram. Like I'm just like, screw it, I'm done with this. And so from then on, I just linked my YouTube and my Instagram. And some answers got deleted. Actually, it wasn't against platform regulations, but it was frowned upon. But I was like, I'll do it anyway. And so that sort of was a nice boost towards like initial YouTube and Instagram and everything like that. Because it is tough to grow when you're small. Like when you have like 100 subscribers or something, you can have good content and just be completely overlooked by the algorithm just because you don't really have that critical mass to get a video moving.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, I remember the leap from like 10 viewers or 10 subs to like 100 to like 500. It's like it's this kind of very, very slow crawl before you hit this critical threshold. And there's really no good way to get seen. So the smartest thing to do is to kind of exploit other platforms and kind of get them to converge. But that's usually really hard. Like trying to get Instagram people on YouTube is like impossible. Blog stuff is a little easier, but God, that took so much time and effort. So I had never considered something like that. That's a pretty brilliant move. I'm gonna have to steal that. And like to what you said, as far as formulating answers, having it be easier when it's focused on somebody. I don't know about you, but half of my day is focused, sit here trying to like think of what to say and how to frame it, and you run out of ideas and it's just shit spinning around in your head that doesn't really answer anything for anybody else. So it is nice to have that one-on-one interaction. Speaking of writing, tell me about your book. You have your book Sweat that's been out for a little bit, which I did a review on some time ago. It's a pretty cool, pretty thorough breakdown of different exercises and how you rank them. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that was actually initially written before Quora. So basically what would happen is that after maybe 4 or 5 years of lifting, I had learned a lot about it, and friends saw that I was getting results, and so they would just ask me about lifting and stuff and help them. Eventually, you get some questions over and over again. And so I would just jot stuff down in Microsoft Word and then just send it to people like, oh, you have questions? The answers are probably. And it just expanded and expanded until it was 200 pages or something. And someone's like, you should probably sell this, man. Like, there's a lot of shit here. I'm like, I guess, yeah, I could just acknowledge, and other people would be willing to pay money for it. Like, oh my God, it's almost like it's a book, right? And so I eventually put it on Amazon. With hindsight, I regret, because they take like 65% of, if you have your own book on Amazon, right? Like they really...
Yeah, and actually, it's I didn't expect this. I don't exploit YouTube as much as some people do. I think for monetization, like ads are one thing, but I know people that are doing live streams, getting super chats like daily, and they're like, oh, I mean, I know I got a buddy of mine. Actually, I'm interviewing him later today. He has like 9,000 subs, but he makes more than I do on just the monetization side of things. The Amazon. The couple of things I put out on Amazon is actually where most of my income comes from, and I did not expect that. And I'm kind of trying to hunker down and focus on that a little bit later. But you're absolutely right. The payout, because what do they do? Like $9.90 up to $9.99, you get 70% of the sales, and then a penny over that, and they cut that in half. So if you charge $20 or $10, it's essentially the same. And it forces you. They want you under that $10 mark, and it shows. So, what do you have your books priced at right now?
Right now, I have it on my website, which I think is like against Amazon policy. But at this point, I just don't give a shit. It's like $20. It's like $20 on my website. The thing is, like, yeah, it would probably be better to have like multiple smaller books that you could price at that $10 or under. Yeah. Because, yeah, when you go over, like, they really blast you. They screw you. And they take, like, 70% or 65% or something, which is, like, yeah, it's crazy. And so, like, I probably won't. Right now I'm working on another book. It's almost finished on ring training, like calisthenics.
Oh, that's cool.
Because those have really surprised me.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, the gym closed. And I was like, I guess I'll try these rings I've been laying around. Holy shit. Like, they're actually I was skeptical. I was like, all right, maybe I'll maintain my muscle or something. Like maybe I'll only lose a little bit, but like they've actually been really, really effective for chest, shoulders, biceps. Okay for triceps, but for chest especially, like ring flies and rings turned out dips and push-ups and stuff. Yeah, like I mean, it's blasphemy to say this, but like at least for me, they're as good as weights. Um, Maybe if you get super strong, it's different, but not that strong. So for me, like plus with my body weight, like they were actually really really good. So that'll be out in a week or two or so. But it probably won't be on Amazon.
That's a good niche though. I mean, I think that'll do well. I mean, just from the SEO part of my brain and the optimizing for capturing a niche or whatever. But to the point of training, I mean, I get it. I dicked around in a CrossFit gym for a couple of years when a buddy of mine had some strongman equipment. That was the only place to train, and I did some strength coaching there. And I got pulled into doing the odd WOD every now and then, and I stained myself by participating in CrossFit foolery. But the rings are no joke, man. I mean, on it's parallel bars, my short little arms, and I'm an okay presser. I'd cruise through 50 reps, and then all of a sudden I'm on the rings, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? It's an entirely different stimulus. And I can imagine, that the calisthenics stuff too gets undersold. I think that whole subculture has figured out how to get pretty devastatingly strong just by manipulating body weight progressions, because you can always change the leverages and the movement to make it harder. And that's progressive overload. It all flies. So you get some guys that can do some pretty impressive shit just with some, their own body weight and some other external implement. I looked a lot at some of the other guys that have used that model. Like Pavel has a ton of books out. Josh Bryant has a ton of little. I didn't know this. There's an Amazon section for like 90-minute reads or something like that. Like that's its own category. So they'll do these like little compact, they're basically articles, with some pictures in it.
Yeah.
But it's like how much you could probably go back, pull all your Quora questions and have, 5 books right there. But, it's a matter of how you want to bundle that. Tell me about your distance running history, because I caught a little bit of some of your previous interviews. I caught you talking about it with, I think Alpha Destiny, but what stood out was you were mentioning the difficulty of running compared to lifting. Give me some of your thoughts on that, on like the carryover, the psychological benefit you think there is. Just a general comment.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I guess I'm known for is like the ability to grind, or like to have like really slow, difficult reps, or like, oh, you think he's done and he gets another rep. Oh, and he's going for another one. Oh, and he gets it, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe that comes from both, physiologically and psychologically from distance running, because that's what you do as a distance runner, right? Like you think you're done and you're just like breaking down a 5-minute race into just like a bunch of different slivers to mentally keep going.
Yeah.
And then that's the same thing during a set, because even like a hard set of 20 rep squat, like a Widowmaker or something, 3 minutes, like 4 minutes maybe, but like in terms of segmentation mentally, it's not as long. I mean, you could argue that it's more difficult technically. Like a 1 rep max, you have to think really quick to get through that sticking point. So you have to like sliver it even more. And so I would say it helps in terms of like work capacity. Sometimes I have workouts and people's reaction is like, oh my God, that's so much volume, or holy shit, you must have been sore for a week. And I'm sitting there thinking like, wasn't that much volume. Like I felt fine. I came back 2 days later and was stronger. Like I wasn't sore at all. And so I think sometimes people who are totally sedentary, they are kind of like behind. And then they think like, oh, cardio will kill my gains, which for them it's the exact opposite, because like that's what would benefit them more than more lifting in some cases, right? Or lifting with more reps or higher volume. We're doing like warming up really well, like winning warm-ups where you're doing 4 sets of 25 or something before the workout. I think a lot of people could benefit from that, just from like a GPP standpoint and getting in better shape. And some people are just, like the workout just wrecks them, and like maybe they're strong, but they could be stronger if they actually had like better work capacity for sure. And that's where I think strongman Like powerlifters could learn a lot from strongmen for sure.
Yeah, and this is the drum that I've been beating for quite a while because and most of the lessons I push the hardest are the ones I fucked myself with. And I spent years on as soon as I realized that I could do instead of doing, 2.5 hour long workouts with a lot of different exercises, I could do some really hard singles over like two exercises and do that like 2 or 3 times a week and literally do nothing else. And as long as I just ate a lot, I got strong and it worked great. But I got really fat. My work ethic went through the floor and it set me back because I had this mentality that I had to live like Kobe beef. Like I just had to be just pampered and lazy. You don't take the stairs. If there's a horizontal moving escalator belt, use that. You always do like the path of least resistance for the sake of preserving gains, and it is entirely counterintuitive. It's the exact opposite, right? I always see like how far away from kind of normal human set point we are when thinking about good training practice. And the reason newbies get so strong so quick is because human beings don't want to be sedentary fat shits. We're built to move around. So a little dose of exercise goes a really long way. But similarly with cardiovascular stuff, like even really good lifters are oftentimes just woefully underconditioned. And it's like if you can do a hypertrophy phase with a shit ton of volume to carry over to strength later in a periodization cycle, if that capacity makes you better, it stands to reason that having some aerobic capacity would help. Funny story. I knew this guy and he was a monster. I think he stopped competing, but his name was Will Dinwiddie. He was a strongman. I believe he was natty and I believe him. It used to be like, oh, you hear like so-and-so's on steroids. Now it's like, oh, dude, that guy's natty. Like, did you hear that guy's natty? It's like the exact opposite. But I believe him. Will was an Army Ranger. And one of the most impressive things is he posted a video, and this is probably 8 years ago, 10 years ago. He posted a video of a 225 squat for 100 reps. And it's the segmentation. I asked him about it. He talked about the exact same thing. He's like, all these suck fests going on these long rucks. He's like, psychologically, it's like I can always do 5 more reps. I can always catch my breath, recover, do 5. And it was like a 10-minute long set. And that always stuck out with me. Really? You saw that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Will was a psychopath. He was like yelling. There's some bet he had with this guy named Marshall White. And he's like yelling out in the middle of it. He's like, Marshall! And he's like trying to psych himself up. But that was one of the most impressive things I ever saw. Will was a 700-pound deadlifter, naturally very strong guy. But the endurance component. So whenever I see people shit the bed in strongman events, and it's common now, we get a ton of like guys, like they can rip 800 pounds off the floor. You put a Husafelt stone on their chest, and they're done. And they turn into these one-trick ponies that are chasing records, but can't crack top 5 at an amateur show. And it's funny. But as far as like contributing to overall gains, it's hugely important. So would you say, now that you've been lifting for so long, how do you rank lifting in terms of difficulty compared to endurance work?
I think they're different. Like, I think because like if you're squatting, and obviously I don't have experience with this personally, like my max is going to be different from other people's max. Like Ed Cohen said something like, oh, my max feels the same as your max. Yeah, I don't know about that, right? Like someone deadlifting 900 pounds, that's got to feel different, right? Like when I max now, it feels different from when I was like starting out. Like you can feel the pressure and like you can manipulate it more easily because you're stronger, but like you can still feel the increase in that pressure. And I would say, running injuries tend to be chronic, whereas lifting much more so is acute. So you always have that in your mind, especially if someone has a history of injury. And they're both tough on the body, and mentally, yeah, it's sort of hard to separate them. I think distance runners can maybe benefit from strength training, but it also goes both ways, both physically and mentally, because they're different. Well, yeah, one is like slow and it's grindy and you just have to hold on and just suffer. The other one is you got to get up, you got to, really be focused in the moment to be able to let loose. Like you're not going to go up to your max and just sort of casually squat it. Whereas like in a marathon, you're not like focused and really up the entire time because you'll just burn out. And so yeah, they're really totally different. But I think, they could to a certain extent benefit from each other.
Absolutely, and I agree with that. I mean, you get a decent endurance runner on a basic strength program, and you tend to see pretty substantial
Oh
improvements
yeah.
in efficiency, right, and their ability to take hills and stuff like that. So I agree with that. Commenting on the initial point about how maxes feel over time, you're right, but I think there's a point of diminished returns that set in with that. I remember squatting like, I don't know, 225 or something, or 275 when I was a teenager, and quitting on a set because I couldn't tolerate the sense of being crushed, which is counterintuitive because I have not felt that since. You would think that as you get stronger, that would become bigger and bigger, more daunting thing. There was definitely a point where the weight of my maximal effort felt different, but ever since I got to I'd say about a 400-pound max, everything after that has felt the same. I mean, I remember feeling like my cheeks were going to explode under 400 pounds, and the rest is just bearing down and just pushing. And at 700, it doesn't really feel different. Now, I've heard Scott Mendelson say things like, "Oh, I get around 1,000-pound bench press and I feel my bones flex." That's a little
Yeah.
different. I don't know what the human forearm is designed to bear in terms of a load, but that's interesting. But now the guys I've talked to, they're
Yeah.
knocking out 900-pound pulls. They're like, it all feels heavy. But once you start to get stronger and stronger, more specialized, the same percentages feel different. Because 70% when I was a 300 or 400 pound squatter was, I could do that indefinitely. Whereas now that's gotten further and further away, and you'll get guys that can't get 5 at 70% when they get really specialized. So it's a little play in the joints right there.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned that in like your the video, what was it, like the training to failure video you did recently. And that's something I've heard a lot of people talk about. And in some ways I'm not particularly strong. And then I'm also like, I would say there's a pretty good likelihood, I haven't had like a biopsy or anything, that I'm like very slow twitch. Because I've done uh, like 10 reps at 90% on the sumo deadlift, which is like, which doesn't even make any sense, right? Like some people hear that and they're like, yeah, I'd get 2 or maybe 3, just because like the leverages. And then like, if I can pull it once, I can just like keep going. And sometimes it gets easier. Like the fourth rep will be faster than the first just because you find the positioning and like you can, get a little bit of like where your hips are set, that kind of thing. And like rep max calculators for me, like I don't even bother with them anymore. It's like you should get 5, and it's like I'm just warming up with 5. Like what the hell? And so yeah, it's one of those things where, and then there's some other people, like I have clients, and this is where it has to be personal and individual, because if I took that worldview and applied it to everyone else, I'd be like, oh, you need to be trying so much harder. But like that's just how they are. That's just like their physiology. And you could look at it either way. You could say like, oh, I'm better at reps, but I'm also like shittier at 1 rep max. But then other people are the opposite, right? Like you could say they're shittier at reps, but maybe they're just better at 1 rep max, right? And so it's, you could either frame it as a negative or a positive based on how you look at it. And sometimes I think people are too hard on themselves. Like oh, I only got 3 reps at 80% or something. You could also flip that around and say like, wow, you're performing in terms of 1 rep max way better than you would expect, right? So there's always like a negative way to look at it. Like I could look at it like, oh, my 1 rep max sucks. And it does, but like then you could also flip it and say, hey, like, but you're really good for reps. So,
and I think that's appropriate is framing it as to what your strengths are, because that can tell you what your predisposition is as a lifter. I know Josh Bryant, and there's not many light bulb moments I get these days, but every now and then I'll come across something. And recently I was flipping through some of Josh Bryant's stuff, and he talked about the difference between what him and Hatfield would call fast gainers and slow gainers, and how they assign, people that are very explosive, and those are the people that when they look at a weight, they get stronger. And those are the people that don't have to do as much. Whereas, you know, it's like if you have a learning disability, which is me, you have to train twice as hard. You know, it's like the same idea. You got to crack the books if you don't gain as much, which means you're doing higher frequency and more work. So it's useful to know how you should train, but it's kind of chicken or the egg. You know, it's like, did you get good at this because this is how you trained? Or did you have kind of a predisposition to it that informed what you like to do? And then depending on your goals, it might be perfectly appropriate. Now, I'd be interested to see you on a strength program for 6 or 8 weeks, because, and I have been kind of following your progress since you came on my radar. You're filling out, man. You're looking pretty thick these days. I was talking to Dennis Arnold, and we're like, man, his subscriber rate and his bicep measurement starting to make me feel, but there it is. There it is. I'm not even going to bother. I'm going to keep my arms below the camera right now. But that disparity also, I think, speaks. I think it gives a good prediction as to how rapidly you would increase. And then there's a question of how much you would dose that in to, if you're primarily oriented towards hypertrophy, you know, to what extent is getting stronger going to help your volume and all of that. But I think you would explode if you went on a very short, kind of neurological based program. But
yeah, I tend to overdo things. But even when I overdo things, I just fucking grow, man. Like it's like, I used to do like German volume training with deadlifts and stuff like that. And, just like crazy stuff. And I think that's one of those things where you have to realize maybe you can't get away with some stuff that you used to be able to when you were not as strong. Because
absolutely,
yeah, like I could get away with, 10 by 10 on deadlifts at a pretty high percentage, which I won't say because someone's going to try it and just get destroyed. But yeah, like you can get away with some stuff earlier in your training career, and then you might have to scale it back. And some people think like volume always has to go up. I almost look at it like a U-shaped kind of thing. Like as you're a beginner, you can't handle that much volume, nor do you really need it, because you're so sensitive to training. Like why bother doing higher volumes, right? And then as you're an intermediate, you might need more, especially if you're someone like me. But then as you're more advanced, the limiting factor almost always becomes your joints and staying in one piece anyway. So usually volume tends to decrease because you're stronger anyway. And so it's like every set is more taxing and more stimulatory. So like I notice I like looking at guys who have trained way longer than me, because that definitely informs things that I will probably have to do eventually, right? Like if you look at most guys who've been lifting hard for 20 years plus, they tend to train differently than guys who are in this sort of 5 to 10 year zone. And I actually consider 5 to 10 years to be like intermediate in a way. Like I'm not really advanced. That's what people are like, oh, you're advanced. Oh, like, am I though? Am I? Like, not really. I don't consider myself to be advanced, like maybe more advanced than some people, but advanced to me is like where you really have to modify your training significantly compared to that 5 to 10-ish year zone, and where like you really have to fight for those gains. Like I've made visible progress this past 2 years, which is kind of evidence of like not being advanced, right? Because if I was advanced, it would be a lot less noticeable. At least that's how I look at it.
I think your assessment or your connection of that label to training requirements, I think is perfect. That's how I look at it too. Because I think people are inclined to think of like a certain measurement or a certain number, and that's relatively different. I've met people that are near world class that I would peg as novice intermediates because of the way they trained, how easily they got strong, how they still responded, and all of the shit that they could clean up. And it's like, well, you're strong while being inefficient, growing from anything. So it is very relative. And to the point of like you being advanced, and this brings up an interesting point too of how we perceive all these things, because you always have to keep the bell curve in mind, right? It's like you get dysmorphia dysmorphia, pretty easily by being around a lot of competitors. And I experienced this too, because my standards for what's good has long been just blown to shit, because I'm around people that are routinely taller, heavier, world-class guys. And I'm just constantly looking up like one day I'll be there. But you are more trained, more muscular than 99.9% of the population. So it's hard to keep that. It's like, okay, well, I'm still here as far as training stimulus requirements are, But at the same time, and it's like, what constitutes an authority is relative. You have infinitely more experience than, and have shown more progress and dedication than so many people. It's like, if you're not qualified to have an opinion or be an authority, it's like, who is? But yeah,
the Russians actually.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, like the Russians. I've always found this interesting. The Russian system, they wouldn't look at the way we would define beginner, intermediate, advanced. They would just say like, oh, if you lift this weight, you're advanced. If you lift this weight, you're like a master of sport or an international master of sport. It was just the numbers. Like, it was just so fixed in stone. I remember I read that when I was like into my second year of training, and even I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. That seems like, I know it's smart, but like, what's up with that?
Well, from that perspective too, and even then, it's like trying to look at populations or groups, whether it's people that are training or elite athletes. You always have to reframe it because it's so different. And it's like with them, for so much of what we pull, and we've done this for a long time, and it's gotten kind of lazy because we haven't really had paradigm shifts in 5 decades. We lean on a lot of Soviet stuff, even though it's not what the same sport that we do, and none of it's been, science. It's like you want to reproduce experiments, and nobody's done that. We just don't have the resources to do it, I guess. But you even have to look at them. It's this population of pre-selected lifters. They were all gotten very young, based on their talent level, and they're disposable. And it very much was this is the system. This is our meat grinder. You're going through here, and if you come out the other side, then you're going to be our world champion. So it's a very unforgiving system, as I understand it. And I think most state-sponsored systems are. But we have to frame it differently because it's so different than you looking at a person and being like, I got to figure out what works for you. So that, like, and you hit the nail on the head. For the last 5 or so years, for me, it's been, and everyone I know is like this. Okay, what can my joints handle? Like, at what rate can I develop without everything falling apart? If it was just muscle, if we all had adamantium skeletons, we'd all be doing GVT twice a day, every day, But there's other things you really have to pay attention to. Have you gotten to the point where you've experienced? Oh, okay, Jeff. Yeah. Let's all right, showing off. Have you gotten to the point where you've really had to modify anything yet? As far as your training?
I tweaked my So I tweaked my QL. I mean, I don't know if it was a tweak or a tear. Probably somewhere between a twerk and a tear, somewhere in there. And that was like 2 months ago to the day. Actually, it was the day that Putin invaded, ironically. But I was doing strict deficit bent over rows at the end of, I know, right? Strict deficit bent over rows. And I just felt something like, not in my lower back, but like near my lower back. Just like,
I've had that.
Like, you're not getting that rep. Like that one's not moving. And then like I couldn't, I could walk, but it was like very painful. I had to keep braced. Like, I couldn't walk without bracing my core, which in some ways was good because like it's a hell of a way to learn to brace, right? Like, talk about Pavlovian, right? Like, you take a step and if you're not braced, like it'll tell you. And and so like even, going to the bathroom, like putting on my shoes the next day, I had to like, because everything tightens up, right? It's worse the day after than when it actually happens by far. And so I was like trying to loop my sock over my foot because I didn't have the range of motion to actually like bend over. And like putting on my shoes probably took 15 minutes. But I got it done. And, I was self-sufficient. But, obviously no squats, no deadlifts. Even weird stuff would be off the table, like no incline bench pressing because it puts pressure down there. I could do Larson presses. I could do no overhead pressing, no seated overhead pressing, but I could do behind the neck pressing, I guess, because there's no like there's less of an arch back or less of a need to brace. I could do pull-ups, but only in like an L sit position. And actually, this is when I was messing around with the rings because the gym closed because of like regulations, which was actually nice because like it kept me, with something new and something where I wasn't comparing myself to the old me. And it's been getting better slowly. I've been getting back to deadlifts, but I tweaked it the other day as well. And it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, it forces you to be smarter. Yeah. And it really, that's like the best way to learn how to be smarter, right? Because if you don't, like, it tells you right away. And so this has been my sort of first major injury, I guess. It's been about 2 months. And it's mostly good days right now. Like, it doesn't affect other training. It hasn't really impacted leg size. But another good thing is that I've actually had to learn a bunch of different variations that I'll probably keep moving forward in some capacity. Like unilateral leg press, I would never have done that before. Like, I would never even think to do it. But it's just easier on the lower back because it's you can't round your lower back with one leg, or at least it's a lot tougher to. Like B stance Romanian deadlifts, like different forms of back extensions, hamstring curls, like leg extensions, like stuff that I wouldn't normally really value very highly, but because I could do them pain-free and not put stress on that area, suddenly they're viable. And then, try them out and you're like, huh, this is actually better than I thought. And like, I've actually maintained my leg size pretty decently. And I think pretty much everyone who lifts hard and heavy over like, the course of 10 years or so is going to have issues somewhere. It's very rare that I meet someone that's like, nope, no injuries at all. Like, and if that's you, usually they use it as marketing, right? Like Matt Wenning, that's his thing.
Yeah.
But even here, I heard him on a podcast. He's like, yeah, I've had, a few groin tweaks, a few, back tweaks or something. So I think pretty much everyone is going to have something at some time. And I think it's good just to prepare for that almost inevitability or eventuality of that happening. And if someone over the course of like 10 or 15 years of lifting had literally no issues, I'm pretty confident in saying that they're going to get suboptimal results in terms of either strength or size. Just to me, that's a sign that they're not training very hard, right? And I'm not saying you shouldn't get injured, but I'm saying like it's probably going to happen at some point if you're really pushing it. I don't know anyone who is like has a clean slate of injury.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I don't disagree with that. I was going to go the other way with it and say if you've lasted that long, assuming that you've grown consistently, like assume that there's some upward trajectory of growth. The people that have been training that long, I'm convinced that of all the genetic predispositions we talk about, that there is a durability factor. And you see it with a lot of the guys that have meteoric rises that, like Wheels is a good example. Wheels has been dealing with some shit in the last couple of years, but he was like an all-time world record holder before that really started to catch up with him. And it's like,
yeah, it happens later. Yeah.
Yeah. And
it happens after.
And I think that's also in line with, pacing your, how you modify your training to accommodate your rate of progression. Because if it took a year and a half for you to go from 700 to 900, well, what changes did you make? Are you trying to handle the same amount of work at just, the same percentage, and now the weight's just higher because you're stronger? Because that shit doesn't fly. And your tendons will let you know that by flying off the bone, especially as kind of juicy as these guys tend to stay. That's a really good point. What you were saying before that, as far as that's why I schedule interviews at 6 a.m. I have the memory capacity of of somebody deep into the throes of Alzheimer's. What point did you make right before that with the?
So I was saying, let's see, durability. Yeah, durability is a lot genetic.
Oh, you were talking about winning. Sorry, you were talking about winning, and I remember winning saying in an interview, because he's a defender of conjugate for that reason, and they have that idea that rolling through these different exercises is in their eyes is like, well, we can train really, really heavy and we can stay injury free because we're not straining the same structures the exact same way, which kind of makes sense. But at the same time, it's like, how many different ways can you handle a fuck ton of load in a bench press variation, and how different really is that in a way that'll keep you injury free? And even he kind of conceded. He's like, well, that's what we think happens. We don't really know. And again, you're looking at a lot of people that train in that style, they're not exactly known for their lifters being injury free. So it's like, you know, what is the proper dose, and how injury free can you expect to see, or can you expect to be? And I know that was a point of contention, and it still is, I think, if you listen to, you know, barbell medicine or any of the guys that are kind of concerned with the narrative around injuries. It's like injuries are part of it. And that's kind of coming into it. If you are going to be around 5 or 10 years, how many people does that really consist of that last that long? Not many. And how does that influence the data that we collect regarding predisposition injury? Because I think you are spot on setting 5 to 10 years of hard training. There's a lot of turnover right there. You know what I mean? People that get into it, they love it. They want to do it more and more and more and more. I live that life, and you're like, okay,
lifting is my love.
Get back to me in 2032 and let's see where you're at. And there's a huge drop off of people. So I think there is a critical threshold of training experience that really shows something different about the experience, your likelihood of injury, what you're likely to see. All I can say is welcome to the club, man, because I've had a ton of back injuries, and you're absolutely right. Getting that injury is really that reframes the way you do things. So now you will be bracing, you will be taking it seriously in a way that you hadn't before. But you know, that's what you have to do to keep evolving.
Yeah, Omar Isuf, he was I think it was on the Iron Culture podcast, which I watched quite a bit. And he was talking about how he was looking into masters lifters, like guys who performed really well at, you know, I don't remember what masters is. It's 40 or 45 or 50 or something. But he said that almost all the masters lifters who were really good, they started late. Like might have been the 50 or the 60-year-old category, but he was like, all of them started like way later than you expect. They weren't in their teens or their 20s or even in their 30s. It was like they started 5 to 10 years before when they peaked, which is like sort of tough to see those trends, because like lifting does beat you up, and often it beats you up later. Like Ronnie Coleman, he didn't have any issues when he was at his peak, and he had a damn long peak. I mean, 8 Mr. Olympias. You only saw these things after. You only saw like, you know, the result of the training. And, you know, there's other factors as well, but I've noticed this quite a bit. Like you can have your run, but then like it does catch up to you later. And like I did this thing in November where I was maxing on the deadlift every day. And then like I have this issue like 3 or 4 months later. And like my instinct was like, there's no way, like I had all this time to recover. But like, did I though? Because that kind of stuff does sort of accumulate. And I don't want to make it seem like, you know, the body is a car and it's just like the more you drive, the more it runs out, or like we do have the capacity to repair and to adapt and to get better, right? Like that's the whole point of training. But some structures and some systems just take longer, right? And you have to be super patient. And you went back to like, you know, natty versus enhanced. The injury rates for enhanced are generally higher because it's giving you what you don't really need, right? And it's giving you the capacity to destroy yourself. And so that's where I don't think the training in terms of strength is that different, natural versus enhanced, because the limiting factor either way is going to be your joints, right? Most of the time. But I think for bodybuilding, that's why you see a lot of guys who are interested in hypertrophy and enhanced. That's where they train like higher reps, not as close to failure sometimes, like fluff and pump, mind-muscle connection, partial range of motion, super safe exercises, avoiding, you know, squats, deadlifts, bench presses. And then obviously some guys are doing like power building and a mixture of both. Some guys are doing DC training. But a lot of guys on the enhanced side are really worried about the risk of injury, and maybe rightfully so, because I think the stronger you get, the more careful you have to be. Like I was watching JM Blakely and Dave Tate. They did like a round table maybe a month or two ago, and they're both really beaten up now. Like they were talking about like the number, like they were talking about using their joint flexions carefully, like spending them wisely. I'm just sitting there thinking like, holy fuck, I don't have to worry about this at all. But like some people do, where they're bone on bone, like everything's just ground down. And so they're talking about how like they would rather train heavier so that they could do fewer reps and those fewer reps would beat them up less, which to me is like totally counterintuitive. But for them, like that's just what beats them up less because they're so, I don't know, already beaten up or something. And so, yeah, it is something you don't really consider when you're getting into lifting. And I don't want to fearmonger or anything, but it is a part of the game that I think is better off thought about earlier rather than later.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's almost like, they say, I don't know, I was watching some documentary about the life on Earth or something, and there seems to be like a consistent number of heartbeats that you get in your life, something like 1 billion heartbeats, and it's like animals with different lifespans. It kind of corresponds to different heart rates or something. It's something, something weird like that. Or you get so many cell divisions and then you die. It's like we have this prepackaged amount of joint flexions. I didn't think of it like that before, but I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like, yeah, spend them wisely. So, I mean, that's a funny way to think of it, but in a sense, it seems rational, especially given what you said about the masters lifters. It's like, well, by starting late, you age into this age division, but you're like fresher than somebody that's been doing it since they're 13.
Yeah.
And you get to spare yourself a lot of that beatdown. And I don't think there's an easy way to frame lifting if you want to call it entirely degenerative or entirely restorative. I mean, one of the first things I read about it when I thought, oh, lifting just makes you Superman and you just get better at everything. That's back when I thought like being the world's strongest man also meant you could like beat anybody up, right? And then like Pujanowski proved me wrong there. Anyways, but I had really romanticized what it was. I remember seeing Fred Hatfield write that lifting is inherently degenerative, and it's like, here's one of the best lifters in the world. He's a PhD. He's written textbooks. It's like, well, he probably knows what he's talking about. But I do see this trend. There's a couple of brands that do kind of take that, what is it, the anti-fragile route, or basically the human body adapts. And it's like, it adapts, but like not, right up until it doesn't adapt. And how it adapts isn't predictable. And the whole point of requiring training variation, I mean, even starting at a linear progression with a rote novice, the reason you stop adapting is because the stress is no longer novel and your recovery, your balance of recovery and stress shifts. So you can keep working really, really, really hard. Nothing happens. And it's like, okay, how do you predict, which structures are adapting? Like you talked about with your QL, that there's these other structures that might not recover, especially if you're transitioning to other things that maintain stress on that area. It's like, how do you predict the point at which something breaks, given all this shit you've done over the last month, over the last few years? And the QL was nasty, dude. I've had probably a dozen lower back injuries over about 10 years. And I was very stubborn with my training before I got to the root of it and fixed it. And it sidelined my training. So it was about 10 years of no real substantial progress because I was just trying to stay together with duct tape. One of my last ones was a QL strain. And it was noticeable because it was off to the side, which was not typical for most of my lower back issues that I had. That lingered around for probably 8 months. And I don't want to make you nervous, but just, and it speaks to the nature of recovery. Like, it is not linear. It's not predictable. It's not a straight line. I would have never pegged that little tweak for being something that was so insidious and chronic. Same thing with like tendinopathy. Like, it sets in and it's just, it's nasty. You can't get rid of it. So yeah, long story short, to summarize this rant, it's like, an ounce of prevention is worth $1 million in this field. If you can do little things to prevent that, you give yourself a better shot of adapting in the first place, becoming more resilient.
Yeah, Brian Bornstein, he said he had it as well. And yeah, he's like, oh, I forget his exact wording, but he's like, yeah, it's a nasty one. Like, it's just so easy to aggravate again. And I was building up with higher reps on the deadlift, like 100 kilos, 110, 120. I did 120 for 20 reps. Just like super light, almost like cardio. I figured, like, if I'm better at reps, I might as well just do reps. And then I was like, oh, well, I did 120 for 20 last week. Like, I'll see what I get for 130. It was zero. It was zero. That's how many I got. It was like it got like 3 inches up off the ground, and then it's just like, nope, like that's not going anywhere. So, you sort of have to like reset your expectations sometimes and realize like if you feel 100%, you're probably 60%. If you feel 70%, you're probably 40 or 30%. And so like it's one of those things where yeah, you have to be really patient with it. And it does sort through who is serious about it, because I could totally see most people giving up with like these types of stuff, if it's back or shoulder, or especially with the back injury, like it really messes up other areas of your life, right? Like a shoulder, like you can still walk around, right? Like
Yeah.
still functional, but lower back, yeah, man. Like,
Well, okay, like I think my most severe like injury, the one that would actually require surgical intervention, was my bicep. I had a bicep rupture doing a tire flip.
yeah,
Somebody pulled out a camera, and I'm like, this one's for Instagram, and I pulled a little too hard and it pulled up. So that's the kind of barrier to being a legit strong man, is ripping your bicep completely off the bone. Me and my wife went to Cheesecake Factory after that. You know what I mean? Like that didn't really impair my life. I did a contest 3 weeks later. I just took a bunch of BPC. And by the way, just a little, I don't like to plug drugs. Anybody that's dealing with tendon issues or whatever, like BPC is one of the most amazing things I've ever experienced in my entire life. BPC 157, it's easy to get. To my knowledge, there aren't side effects, but I don't know how thoroughly it's been.
Is it natty? Is it natty?
I count it as natty. So it's a gut peptide. It's a gut peptide that they distill. But in studies, they with rats, they showed that the rats, it would sever their Achilles tendon. It would grow back their Achilles tendon. And you know how slowly tendons recover. So the idea is it creates angiogenesis. So the reason tendons recover so slowly is because they don't get good blood flow. All the arm wrestlers I know will blow their arms out in practice and then go immediately into a bunch of bandage work to get blood flow, because that's how the tendons recover and thicken out. Anyways, so I literally went from not being able to feel where my attachment was to 3 weeks later, it was about 1.5 inches thick, just from daily injections. Wow. Now, of course, N equals 1, that's my experience, but that's for tendon issues and ruptures. That tends to be just a hugely productive thing. But comparing that to the lower back stuff, and it gets downplayed a bit. I understand not wanting people to sit at home and do nothing. You have to get up and get moving when that happens to you. But the lower back stuff, small tweaks make day-to-day shit like impossible. So yesterday, this is how I know I'm getting old. I bent over to grab my glasses off my nightstand, and I felt that shift in my back. Like I was just a little too cold. I moved a little bit the wrong way. It was like a 6-inch range of motion. I was like, oh, fuck. And I'm like, that's all it takes for me to like be careful crossing my legs, get up a little bit slower. And the serious ones, like once you get one, you don't want it again, because it genuinely makes everything harder. So like I understand not wanting to fearmonger, because the trade-off of being stronger is worth it. The trade-off of the activity is worth it. There's no question about it. But at the same time, it's like there's plenty of motivation to do what you can to make sure that's not a frequent appearance in your training. Not just quality of life, but you can't train. Like you just said, you had to do a whole bunch of different exercises just to be able to get work in. You cannot train. You can't progress if you want to be competitive, even if you just do it recreationally. So I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that preventative measures, whatever the hell that means, comes in just as a catch-all. And I know there's some discussion about what that does to the narrative of training and whether it discourages people from training or not.
It's interesting, because I would actually I'd pay good money to get Jordan from Barbell Medicine and like Stuart McGill and Austin and the Squat University guy in a room. Like I would,
in one room.
Not even in terms of entertainment, but also in terms of entertainment, but also just in terms of education, and like they're not really at each other's throats, but they have like very different opinions on training. And it is interesting because like movement, I think you mentioned this earlier, movement can hurt, but it can also heal. And so like two people could look at the same glass of water and say half full or half empty. And you can say, oh, one is being pessimistic, one is being overly optimistic. I mean, at the end of the day, like it's just water, right? And so I think it would be really interesting just to have them like have that discussion and, try to find out like why they're looking at the same relative information, the same studies, similar populations, and why they're coming to fairly different conclusions. And I guess I'm sort of in the middle. And this injury, like I'll admit, has sort of made me shift to one side a little bit.
Become a little more
'Cause that's all it takes,
sensitive
right?
to the cause, right? Once you go through it, you're like,
Yeah.
okay, it's not all nociception. Like it's not all that. Like it's still relevant in the recovery process because people get gun shy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that don't want to go pick up a barbell again, and there's some work that has to be done. But that's true with all physical therapy. You have my wife's mother-in-law. When she ends up in urgent care or something, if she spends a couple days in bed, she has to go through physical therapy. There's always that hesitation to be uncomfortable to restore yourself, and that's kind of universal, right? And I think I don't know how we would set that up. I think that would be a service to the world if we made that happen and got those people together. I think the first thing you would see is that everybody would be hedging their language a little bit more than they do when they're from afar.
Yeah, like digging in.
Because it's easy, and I don't know if you deal with this. I deal with this all the time. The voices in my head that it's like, well, nobody's in the room, so I could start barking. And you're like, well, let's pretend to be reasonable human beings and then other people are in the room. Because there's a fair amount of sensationalized language that goes around that kind of, I think, overrepresents one side. And when you get a bunch of professionals in the room, they start break it down. You're like, well, a lot of this stuff they actually practice is very similar.
We agree, yeah.
And it really comes down to, well, I think it works, but for a different reason. And in practice, as with a lot of evidence-based stuff, it doesn't really inform a different approach to the degree you might expect. But that would be incredibly interesting to see. And I interviewed Brian Carroll, and he went on about this because he's a McGill guy. And Brian's a shit stirrer. Brian is cocky and he's aggressive. And before I interviewed him, he was in the comments under the post I made, intentionally talking shit to people and rallying them up, kind of intentionally as a point to like, get a discussion going. But that is I don't know, it's entertaining, but that is a feature of this that controls how people react and how much emotion they bring to it. And I think that's framed the discussion quite a bit. So.
Yeah, no, it's something that's super interesting. And I think if they all were in the same chat, you'd have like maybe more hesitancy. Like Squat University, Aaron something. Something. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. He's a brilliant marketer, right? Like he'll put out stuff on Instagram that just pisses people off, right? Like a 500-pound perfect looking squat is better than a 620. And then you get a bunch of people who are just like, oh, fuck this guy, right? Like,
boom.
And then it gets like, 5,000 comments and it's way more reach and exposure. And like, I know why he's doing it because once you're in the fitness, you're like, why people say what they say, or like, there's a marketing aspect behind a lot of the stuff. It's like, he's saying it for a reason. And, that's a big part of the reason and the way that he's built his brand. And like, in a room with the barbell medicine guys, I think he'd be a lot more careful just because like, they're very well versed and very well read about the literature. And like Jordan in particular is one of the guys who I would not want to debate ever because I've seen him like in action enough that like, he can just summon up, stats and data from like who knows where. And, so he'd be making sure that they were on point with like statistics and like the language they used. It would be super interesting though, I think. And it would be very productive. Yeah.
A lot of this discussion, and the data is relevant, for as much as I've kind of gone off the rails recently as doing a lot of content taking digs at the evidence-based approach. Especially obviously in medicine and recovering and how to prevent injuries or handle injuries, it's all relevant. But at the same time, and this parallels certain world events that happen where it's like, okay, we have this pool of data, but there's also a value assessment that has to be done that objectivity or science can't really tell you. What is the amount of risk, given that the risk, what is the appropriate amount of risk that you are willing to handle? Where's the trade-off for you? And there's definitely some qualitative stuff that comes into it and I think there's different assumptions being made about what the appropriate trade-off is that may be a little bit more personal. So I think there's even a philosophical discussion to be had in addition to crunching all of the data. But yeah, it's I'm sure going to be a contentious topic for a while. I think all you can really do is cast a wide net, do as much as you can to keep yourself resilient, and that means doing a lot of shit you don't like to do. But how gun shy you're going to be, you can't tell somebody how gun shy they should be in lifting. That's going to be a personal thing. And as a value assessment, I just don't care about people that aren't really serious lifters, and I know that's they deserve somebody's attention, but that's not in my field of concern, because I don't think developing excess strength to a certain point is healthy. I think as far as diminished returns of what you get as far as being able to lift 10 pounds, 50 pounds more, there's a point where you're just doing this because of your ego, or because, we only have so many decades left and I want to do something impressive. But if you're just looking for bone density and being able to function in the real world, like, do you really need to go above a 400-pound squat? Is that a thing? So the diminished returns from how it makes you better versus the likelihood or the certainty of more wear over time, I mean, that's a discussion to be had. But
I found that I found that I'm more risk averse now than I was like my first few years of training, just because you're lifting lighter weights and you recover faster, and it's like sometimes you don't even know about like what good technique is because you haven't had an injury yet, or you haven't had that sort of wake up call. Like I put my 2018 training up on YouTube, just like a year in review, and oh man, like there was a lot of really ugly stuff there where it's like you're squatting and it's like it's questionable in terms of like the structure of the squat, and like a lot of upper back rounding and mid and lower back, like everything is just sort of rounded. A lot of like deadlifts and bench presses and stuff like that, because you don't even really think about that necessarily, right? Like you just want more numbers, and this is how you get your numbers the next week, and you're like eventually it just ends up being I would say I'm more durable than most, and like if I get injured, right, like I think most people need to be at least somewhat careful. Everyone has to decide for themselves what risks they're going to take. Like I've worked with athletes who are significantly stronger than me, and like they're not doing it for health. They know they're not doing it for health. And anyone this goes for muscle as well, right? Like it's a certain amount of muscle. It's not for health, and if you're natural, it's probably not necessarily healthy, but it's if you're past a certain point, it's not going to help your longevity. It's not going to help your functionality. It's just like because you want it, basically. But it's not. I think too many people, they try to spin this like looking like a jacked dude into being healthy. Like I guess it is, but you can be healthy without a ton of muscle or strength as well.
Yeah, and the obvious trade-offs that happen to get there, especially the more muscle you have, there's a point where mass is kind of mass as far as your body is concerned. Your heart still has to work very hard if you're 300 pounds, even if you're shredded. So there's a point where, and obviously not having excess adipose tissue is a bonus, but there's a point where there's still an impact just from the weight, and everything that has to be done to get to that point requires certain sacrifices. So yeah, the as soon as you put competitive at the end of something, health takes a hard backseat. And people know that, but it's like it's better than not doing anything. It's better than being sedentary, but that's a pretty low bar that we're setting there, So now I do think paying attention to health for competitors is important. You want to have that cap because there's bodybuilding is a rash of deaths. It's very much, and anybody who's in it will attest. A good friend of mine has been bodybuilding for 15 years, and he got fed up because he would do these preps, and he's like, I'm sick of it. He's like, it's a sport of who can take the most drugs. It's not even about the muscle growth. And I mean, the muscle growth is a factor, but it's still, whether you're natural or whether everybody's natty or everybody's on, it's still going to select for the best responders regardless. But there's this extra layer of how do you get the most size and vascularity and graininess and have no water under your skin? How do you do all these conflicting things? How do you diet down to zero body fat while maintaining all of this extra mass? It's the most unnatural thing in the world. Like having 300 pounds of like mass and being 2% body fat, that's unnatural. But to have the dehydration and the preparation, you only get that through drugs. And there's this rash of deaths. And it's like, okay, what's the limit before people look at this and say this is not viable as a sport anymore? It's a scary set of circumstances.
Yeah, the IFBB, they have a huge problem. Like, not just mentally, but ethically and morally. Like, they're putting on a show that is killing people, essentially. And I know that's not even a big statement, because that's literally exactly what it's doing at an increasing rate. So, yeah, I mean, the genie's out of the bottle in terms of like steroids. Asked pretty regularly people who were like, what should I take, or like, what's my set? And then when I say I'm natural, they're like, oh no, like no way, like, because they have this expectation of what natural looks like and what enhanced looks like, and they've watched so many natty or nots that they think with a halfway decent physique is all something, and so it can be really frustrating. This is part of the reason why I don't even do natty or nots, because it's impossible to defend yourself. So, I mean, if you're on drugs, you're like, no, I'm not. And they're just like, well, no. I got a message the other day. They're like, I will only believe you're natural if you take a drug test every day for a year.
I saw that.
And you have to have someone there witnessing it and like watch, take the sample. I'm like, like drug tests are expensive from what I've heard. Like, don't even test everyone in the competition because how expensive they are. And it's like, there's no way to really prove your innocence. And like, if someone is a 1 in a million freak in terms of muscle growth and structure and everything, and they do everything right in 10 years, they're not going to look natural. They're going to look like most people would think is enhanced, even if it's completely natural. So that's why I don't even throw shade like that, because it's almost like a blow, because they have no way to actually defend themselves or protect themselves. Plus, like, you don't even know. Like, there's no way to tell for sure anyway. So, all these knots, there's so much gray zone in terms of like guys taking a bunch of stuff but who still look kind of mediocre, and then guys who take nothing but nothing else and look tense. There's just so much gray area that it's like, I'm kind of glad that they've gone away and we're like not as focused on natty or not, because there's no way to tell for sure.
It's speaking of the bell curve, and speaking of that, you have to keep the bell curve in mind. I mean, because we're speaking about that earlier, as far as how we get this skewed vision of what advanced or elite is based on what we're constantly exposed to, and that's a perfect example, because the guys, I think most of the bell curve is comprised of people that will take androgens, even a good amount, get some immediate benefit, and then given their genetics and given their shitty training. It's not like if you get an immediate jump in, once you start using, that doesn't sustain. You know what I mean? It levels out, diminished returns set in, your homeostasis kind of shifts up a little bit. But the only way you keep that crazy upward trajectory is if you up the dose, or if you actually have good training in genetics and know what you're doing. Yeah, absolutely, which a lot of people don't. So most of the people that are on look like shit. And I started training at LA Fitness. I was like 19. And I remember all the guys that had been on a good amount of gear for several years. And you're talking about guys that can't bench 300 pounds. You're talking about guys that have 20% body fat, guys that aren't exceptional. And you look at what they're doing, how they're eating, how they're training. And it's like most people jump on it as something that's a shortcut, which is like the most useless application of it. I get the argument for it kind of being a quote unquote shortcut, but when you treat it that way, it's like the worst of both worlds. It's like, okay, you sold this thing out, because everybody is going to judge you for being a drug using asshole or whatever, skewing the curve for everybody else. But at the same time, you're not getting anything out of it. You're just using it so you don't have to work that hard and go out and drink 5 nights a week and hope that the stress on your liver doesn't kill you. It's a crazy dynamic, yeah. But it just goes to show, and most of the freaks that are just running out of room to stack muscle on, it's like in a natty world, most of these guys I think are still top tier. But yeah, it's an interesting philosophical discussion. I wanted to ask you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like I see it all the time, and it's like it's always so sad because often these guys assume that everyone is on, and so these are the kind of guys who just assume that anyone with a decent physique is on, even if those guys are natural. And so that's where it's like they use a ton of stuff, and then they see a natural who looks better than them. They're just like they don't want to accept that. Like that's an even tougher pill to swallow than what they've been swallowing.
Absolutely.
So they don't even want to like and I'm not against the if like everyone is checking all the boxes, right? Like if they've been training for a while, natural, and physique or their strength goals or whatever require it. For me, like there are so many other ways to assess a person rather than natty or enhanced. But if someone is using to like get a somewhat decent beach body, but not really because their diet sucks, like to me, like I'll judge them just based on the stupid decision. But if someone like is an elite athlete, like they're an Olympic weightlifter, and like if they don't use, they're gonna not even go, right? And
It's
if they
the
like
sport.
that's the thing, right? It's just part of the sport. It literally is, right? Like by now, I think pretty much everyone knows like a lot of professional athletes aren't natural. I know, it's shocking. Some people here they're just like, oh no, well I didn't think so. Like that's just part of a lot of these strength and power and speed sports. Like if you look at the top 100-meter times of all time,
Yeah.
a lot of them have been busted, like amphetamines or steroids or whatever. And like the only one who hasn't been busted is Usain Bolt, but of course he was natural, right? So, and so a lot of people, they don't realize, I guess, what it takes, and but that's a totally different situation than like, taking it your first year of training. Like I trolled, I don't know if you saw the video. I trolled this guy who tried to sell me steroids, and um, I was like, "What do you have for the first year?" Like I heard Trent is good, and he's like, "Oh yeah, let me send you the list of the first year stuff." And some guys who just like think that it's just like a vitamin or something, like just it's a supplement, whereas it's a big decision.
And that's important. And I have a hard time talking about, or I have a hard time defending my use or the decisions I made without sounding like a test salesman, because there is a risk assessment. There's a trade off, and that's something I had to get right with. Especially, I used to be a huge natty white knight up until I don't know, probably 2014. Actually, it was about the time Lance Armstrong got busted. That's what switched my mindset and the way I looked at it, because you took this guy, I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars to cancer research. He was an American legend. He was this staple, and they raked his ass over the coals without talking about the top 20 or 30 that also busted, where it's like, okay, was it the one bad egg, right, that ruined the sport? And I hear a bunch of things about competitively he was a prick, and maybe all that's true. But he was a cog in a machine where everybody else was on the same playing field, and he was still the most dominant person in the world. And that just sat with me wrong. I'm like, okay, criticize the game, criticize the lack of testing or whatever incentive structures exist for people to do this. But he got raked over the coals as like being a bad person for doing this, which showed this kind of disconnect, I think. Because what the best of the best of the best do shouldn't necessarily mirror or be expected to repeat back to people what the average person does. And as much as I can get right, because I've been doing this for 20 plus years, and I made a very specific list of decisions about what I'm willing to do and how far this is willing to go. Which, by the way, I'm fucking enjoying this year of not having anything in my system. It's like, it's shitty, but it's great. But it's, you still have to remember that people do look at you, they do follow you. And I am adamant that most people have no business being on. Most people that step into the gym that have training goals, it's not something to fuck around with. It's not something to take lightly. I treat it like, when I'm recommending it, it's like those psychotropic drugs you take, that it's like, oh, you could take this for depression. But it's like, if you go off without tapering, I don't know, you might have a stroke or something. Like, you have to take it seriously because it has real ramifications for how your body works. And you're right, people treat it like vitamins. It's so easy to get. It's cheaper than what you get at GNC. It's absurd how the market's saturated with it. And people have access. They don't know any better. And they're like, yeah, fuck it. Why not? And that is unfortunate. So how I balance, I don't really know how I balance kind of my defense of people doing what they think is in their best interest versus, kind of protecting against all the fucking idiots that are going to be influenced into making really bad choices that set them back or cause more harm than whatever they got out of it. It's a really hard balance to strike. Like, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, too much honesty can be difficult. Like the two, I guess, ends of the spectrum. On one end, just no one talks about it, right? Like, everyone is a fake natural. Oh, we're natural, of course we are. But they're using. It has negative consequences. Sure, like lying is not great about this stuff. But then there's like people who show themselves injecting on camera, and it's like, here's my full cycle, and this is where I get it, and it's like, these are all the benefits, and it's like talking up and putting it on a pedestal, except it's not a pedestal because everyone can get it. It's like, it's on a pedestal that's within reach and very easy to get.
Yeah.
So I think, there have been a few channels where I think they've been a little bit too much like pushing it. But then like where do you be in the middle of that? Like between fake natural and like, going yourself doing it and then like how great it is. Like, yeah, it's a very tough decision. Then also like the consumer does have some responsibility there as well, right? And like, where do you strike that balance? Like, do you just say, hey, I'm not natural and this is about what I take, but you don't mention specifics? But then like education is still important. Someone's going to be talking about education just because there's a demand for it, right? Like, different for more place, more dates, and there's other channels who talk cycles and stuff. Is it bad to talk about cycles? Like, there are negative externalities there, right? Like, you talk about those very directly, and this compound does this. Like, it does incentivize some people to use it, and some of those people maybe should not be using it.
No, I agree with that. Yeah, and it's like freedom is a motherfucker. The second people have the ability to make their own decisions, they're going to make really bad ones in very large numbers. So it's it's crazy. All you can do is really be honest and frame the positives and benefits, along with the very, very real negative consequences. And there's even lines in the sand I've drawn because this is a hobby. This is something I do for fun. I know exactly where my upper limit is. I'm a gatekeeper. I stand no risk of setting records, and I'm not going to break myself trying to do that. So if over the next 5 or 10 years, if I squeeze out another 5 or 10% of my numbers, that's fantastic. But they always start with wisdom. Like, you go on the forums, they're like, oh, you got to do it smart. You go low dose, and oh, time on is time off. And, this is how you do it. And then you start competing. And this is the benefit of competing, is the insight it gives you, because meatheads and competitors, their favorite thing to talk about is their training, their diet, and what gear they're blasting. And you don't have to be around very long before you realize what people do. And nobody goes off. And I mean, nobody goes off. And a lot of people, it's not blast and cruise, it's blast and blast more. And that's a trade-off that they make. And I can look at you and be like, dude, you're doing this for a hobby. Like, you don't make money off this. You spend thousands of dollars a year to compete, to try to drive your mediocre Instagram following. It's like, you want to talk to somebody, but they have their mindset and that's what they want to do. But the environment out there perpetuates that. So like, okay, testosterone. I have strong views on tests. I'm like the weed guy 10 years ago about it's medicinal, man. Like, it's good for you. Used in reasonable doses, reasonable being replacement doses, 200 milligrams a week. I see it as having a lot of benefits with very, very minimal downside. And I think most medical professionals or endocrinologists would probably agree with that. Again, doesn't mean everybody needs to go out and get a script, but it can solve a lot of problems that are associated with aging and winding down to die, and a lot of things we think of as relating to midlife crises. So I'll probably be on a low dose of test for the rest of my life. That's a decision I made. I've talked to doctors about it. I've talked to my wife about it. That's a trade-off. That's something I'm willing to do. That is night and fucking day from the 2 grams a week. Tren is a nasty drug. I think it's recently been found to be psychotoxic or neurotoxic.
Yeah.
Neurotoxic, which makes complete sense because you get guys that experience like homicidal ideation or like violent thoughts, violent dreams, aggression spikes through the roof. I've equated it to the villain from Fern Gully, Tim Curry's character, the smoke monster or whatever. Like, it is a nasty fucking drug. You look at these orals. The orals were the easiest thing to get. I've gotten orals off of eBay before. and it's so easy to access. People think, oh, it's a pill, so it's easier. And it's like, no, it's way fucking worse. Like way worse.
Yeah.
It's liver toxic. It's
Liver, yeah.
all of the negative side effects are going to be ratcheted up to 11. But people see that, they think it's better than an injection. So I think the education can go a lot, and it can do a lot. To do that, you have to have an honest, open discussion. But you can't be the guy out there being like, oh, you want to get jacked and fucking juicy like me? Like, this is what you're gonna take. It is a hard thing to regulate. So
yeah, that's where when Greg Doucette put testosterone in a list of natural supplements for ectomorphs, it actually fucking pissed me off, because that's the gateway. Like, that's someone's an ectomorph, they've been chronically undereating, maybe they've been lifting a few years, and then like they just have testosterone tossed in this list of supplements. Like, that's one thing that was like, I mean, how could you even put that in a list of supplements if you're just like way over the top? But yeah, it's one of those things where there's not that much good education, and yeah, again, that balance is super tricky. And I've heard stories of guys, because like people in the industry talk, even if I'm not like in the US and going to meet and stuff, like people still talk online, and it's one of those things where, you hear about a lifter, and like, I won't name him because I still respect him a lot, but like, you see their article on like, station and technique and stuff, and then like a few years later, you realize that they were on like 5 grams of stuff or something.
Yeah.
And you're just like, well, like that might have contributed a little bit. And so, I think it's one of those things where it's not talked about as much. And, it certainly does have a tremendous impact. But yeah.
That's a general problem too, as far as establishing what authority is. It'd be nice if there was a clean flow chart of figuring out who to listen to, because I started lifting in like 99, 2000. I was a teenager before YouTube or Instagram or whatever was a thing. And I remember being saturated with information back then, just from magazines or whoever you would talk to at the gym. You want to talk about misinformation. The weight room at 24 Hour Fitness in 1999 was a hub of some stupid bullshit. But now that's just exaggerated with everybody being able to have a platform, everybody being able to attract followers based on the way they look or the way they talk or whatever else. Sifting through the people that you might look up to based on, well, this guy's a good deadlifter, this guy has a good physique. I mean, gear is absolutely a factor, the steps they took to get there. In another sense, all of the other things are a factor too, because genetics, I mean, I know guys that are world class. I talked about them earlier, world class, but still kind of be a novice intermediate. Just because you were such a fast gainer, you grew faster than like you could learn. There's people I wouldn't trust to coach, a peewee football team. And similarly with the type of dedication that you get that goes into training, and you look at somebody that's dedicated their life to it for 10 years, how appropriate is that for somebody who has recreational goals or whatever? The willingness to break yourself versus anything else. I think it's good. It's one of the reasons I do like channels. I try not to get up on my ivory tower too often. I probably do more often than I should, but I try not to look down on people who kind of corner that audience, who are more kind of dialed down, more introductory focus, because those people need attention and they need to know what the reasonable steps are. And it's like, you can always go batshit crazy if you decide you love it. But the average person in the population jumping straight into the freaks program or the hyper competitive program or the like, I'll fucking die for this type of branding, it's not helpful. And it's usually what leads to burnout. I think it's usually why people are around for a couple of years and then they're like, fuck this, I'm going to go do a triathlon. Is the unrealistic standards that get set.
Yeah, absolutely. And like there's something called, I think Alec Kiri said this in one of his videos recently. Everyone knows about body dysmorphia. There's also strength dysmorphia, right? Like you see all these feats of strength. Like you mentioned this a little bit earlier. You see all these feats of strength. That's where it becomes your normal. Because on Instagram, like, I don't know, 3-plate bench, 4-plate squat, 5-plate deadlift. I mean, there's like, female powerlifters who aren't heavy hitting those numbers, right? But like, those are not really going to be standout lifts. But in like a typical gym, like those will really get attention, especially like here in China. Oh my God, like the level is super low. I think Jeff put the poll on his YouTube channel. No, you're not a huge fan of him. I think you go too hard on him. He's legit. Even science based, like he blends it well with other you know, being realistic about it as well. But he did a poll on his YouTube channel, and it was like average squat, bench press, and deadlift. I don't remember the exact averages. It's still up on his page, but the average bench was like a plate and a half, squat like 2 plates maybe, deadlift a little bit more than that. And so like, you know, a lot of the average YouTube fitness enjoyer is a beginner. Yeah. And then there's some who are intermediate. And then there's someone who's advanced. Like they might watch it for fun or for like the personality thing or like the entertainment. But in terms of information, if someone is advanced, like they already sort of have their shit figured out, right? And they're not going to get that much from videos, maybe the occasional gem or something to use. But, you know, a typical channel is probably not going to be giving them that much information. I think, yeah, it's probably like 80% beginner, 15% intermediate, and then like 5% maybe advanced. And then like, yeah, the numbers are a lot lower than I think a lot of creators think, because they assume, because they're in the world, right? We're in this world where we see these big lifts and we assume these, you know, numbers are fairly normal. But then like if you go to an average gym, especially in some countries where it's not that serious, I mean, a 2-plate bench is unusual.
Yeah.
If you put more than 3 plates on a squat, people start staring and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I remember those days when I just had a small gym to go to and when I was chasing the strong guys in the gym. And I remember looking up to that mark as being almost unattainable, like 225 for reps. Like that's how you know you made it. And it's not an unreasonable goal as kind of making it for most people anyways, you know, because it takes time to get to. You still need expertise. You still need attention. You still need discipline. And that's excess strength. You know, that's people aren't born into that. You know, being a construction worker, being a laborer, being somebody who uses their body, that's still not going to get you to a 300-pound bench. So I think that's right. The strength dysmorphia is a thing. Wherever there's lofty competitive goals, there's people that will inflate how important it is or how common it is or how much they're willing to do to get there. And that's a thing. As far as Jeff Nippard, I know I've probably hit that drum one too many times. I will go on record as saying, and I haven't said this explicitly in the videos. It's hard to modulate when I'm being critical what my obligation is to kind of go around and give credit where credit's due. I have no doubt that Nippard is a good trainer. I mean, he obviously has a good physique. I believe he knows what he's talking about. And I haven't watched a huge number of his videos. I've scoured through probably a dozen to kind of pull out clips to make a particular point. And I do overestimate, or at least am quick to kind of blast people for that particular thing, which to the huge majority of lifters, it's not really relevant and it's not really an issue. I've tried to go out of my way not to be a critical channel or not to be a destroys or whatever, you know? I mean, I have about 300 videos out, and I think 5 or 6 could probably be construed as hit jobs. But it's like all of the things you could criticize they've been done already, right? It's like nobody's going to benefit from another Seedman video. You know, I did one of those. The things that are obvious bullshit are few and far between. So I think, you know what I mean? It's like you have to be egregiously bad. At that point, everybody's jumping on you. I think most training content out there is fine. And I would assign that to Nippard's stuff. I mean, I believe he has a lot of experience and knows a lot of what he's talking about. So I understand why people see my fetish with knocking down people on the evidence-based side as it's like I have a chip on my shoulder. But it's like the one thing that I think can be criticized and not a lot of people are talking about. So that's why I go a little hard. But generally, I do think that they're useful. I think Nippard's good. I think he comes to reasonable conclusions. I just think that most of the reasonable conclusions he comes to have nothing to do with the evidence. So that's kind of with a line in the sand. The best thing that I think I've heard was from the data-driven strength guys, which is like, it's not meant to inform what you do. It's hypothesis generating or whatever, which is useful. I think it's useful. But anyways, that's my rant on that. That's my defense against me being a Nippert hater. Um, and speaking of this is actually a good segue, because before we shut this down, I did want to ask you, because I am a salty human being, and I have to spread that around as much as I can get, or as much as I can. I was going to ask you who your favorite YouTubers are, up and comers, and maybe you can throw out a few. I actually want to pinpoint specifically what you hate about the industry, or the presence of, let's say, YouTube trends, channels, individuals. Don't hesitate to name names. Don't hesitate to put people on blast. What do you specifically, what boils your blood from what you've seen that's out there?
I guess I'll take the second part first. I don't really have an issue with the evidence-based kind of thing, as long as it's not over-extrapolated. And some channels, they do, like, here's this workout that is based on this study, and it's like, that can definitely go a little bit too far. It's like you take the 5 best EMG movements, and then it's like, this is the workout, that kind of thing. I think that can go a little bit too far. Mm-hmm. I've read some like articles on T Nation where it's like, these are the 5 best exercises because of this EMG experiment on only me, n equals 1. It's like, well, that's a little bit much. So I think, yeah, over extrapolating the science is definitely a thing. But again, yeah, Nippert's pretty good about balancing that. And I think it's one of those things where you do have to balance it, because a lot of people, they see science-based, and yeah, it is sort of like a branding or a marketing kind of thing. And so, it can be very easy to go down that slippery slope where like everything is science-based and then you're ignoring sort of practical, pragmatic practice stuff. But yeah, he's pretty good about balancing that. I have mixed feelings about the biomechanics craze. I don't know if you've noticed, like the past year to 2 years, it seems, biomechanics has been a major focus.
In the hypertrophy side of things, like, or you're talking about like in specific athlete or strength development, like what
so specifically, so specifically hypertrophy, where it's like you're trying to optimize like with the line of pull or something, like following the fibers. I think there's a time and a place for it, but I see it even in my own gym, where like I can tell that they saw this variation on Chinese social media, which was imported from Western social media, and I actually I've talked to the guy who fucking invented it, and now I'm seeing it getting fucked up in my own gym. I want to go to the person there and be like, hey, yeah, I chatted with this guy a few days ago, and you're fucking up his movement. So I think sometimes people see something and they don't know why they're doing it. And this can be frustrating for the people making the movements, because sometimes there's sound logic behind it, right? Like it actually makes sense in terms of biomechanics. But often it's being applied to people who probably shouldn't be using it anyway. Like if you're a beginner and you're avoiding like bench press and you're avoiding squats and avoiding deadlifts and avoiding pull-ups and bent over rows and basic movements, because those are suboptimal or they have problems with them, and maybe they do to a certain extent. We talked about like fragility and longevity before, but if you're in the first year of lifting and you're avoiding the bench press and your only reason is like you're scared of it or you heard like it's flawed or something like that, to me that's a big red flag. And often those people get fuck all results. I've noticed that so many times on like client questionnaires where they're avoiding these big movements for whatever reason, and then it's been 3 or 4 years they've been lifting and they still look like 3 months of lifting or something. And that's to me, I think going out of your way.
That's what fuels my that's what fuels my saltiness to that particular thing, because the trend of optimal being a thing, even existing at all, the word optimal makes me want to blow my brains out, because the most vulnerable people are the ones that there are the most of. Like you said, 85-90% of the people listening are rote novices or beginners or just kind of getting their feet wet. And the word that they respond to, what's the best? What's optimal? And it doesn't exist unless you can kind of take people and figure out based on where your experience is, well, this is probably more appropriate for you, which has nothing to do with the over specialized, like kind of white knuckled surgical approaches. When you're new, you're just a pile of marble. You just need a mallet. That's all you need. You don't need surgical. You don't need specificity. You don't need to be jumping into what your favorite IPF powerlifter is doing, where they do compound lifts 5 times a day, every day of the week because they're hyper specific. Anyways, that's funny you say that with the biomechanics and the obsession with trying to be like, well, benching is suboptimal. I'm not getting the right, like moving with the fibers, right? Like really, that's what you need. You don't need to just like do a good movement and use progressive overload to drive progress. Is there somebody, are there some big names that are doing that? Because I have kind of a very vague idea in my head of what you're talking about. You're not talking about like Israel doing like the really exaggerated like full range of motion. Are you talking about like kind of a subtly different phenomenon?
Well, I've certainly had disagreements with Mike Israel. I think by and large his content is really good. He's one of my favorites.
I agree
for sure. Fucking hilarious. Just good dude through and through. Some minor disagreements with like program design and how much volume is ramped, maybe with resensitization. Technique, I think, maybe a little bit over exaggerated with like super strictness. I think most people don't have to have that strict a form, and sometimes I see beginners who have form that is too strict. It's like they get more from loading it up a little bit and moving a little more naturally. Because you can absolutely kill your progress just from like trying to get the most out of the least weight. There's a time and a place for getting more out of less weight, but that's usually later, and it's usually with certain movements. But if you're avoiding like all the big basics, like Doug Brignoli is one where he's like, I don't squat because it's suboptimal. I don't deadlift because spinal loading. I don't bench press. I don't like all the big basics are like off the table pretty much. And then they're swapped for these super isolation movements. And then, to me, that just seems like they would be a good supplement, perhaps later in your training career. Like maybe you're a little beaten up and you want something that doesn't stress a certain area, but it's almost like trying to switch your lifting for prehab. And, I just don't see that being optimal. Kasim of N1, he's good though, actually, because, maybe I wouldn't use all of his movements in the first year or first few years of a lifter, learning the basics. But certainly for him, it's very easy to defend what he's doing because it actually makes sense in terms of the biomechanics. But it still wouldn't be something that I would emphasize in the first few years. And I think he's actually said that, right? Like these are maybe more advanced. Maybe these are just like to really put those last few pounds of muscle on your body, especially if you have a lagging area or something. But I mean, we have so many people who got great results from these basic movements. And now, there's a pushback. People want to be contrarian. And I'm not saying Kasim has done this, but there certainly have been people who have been like pushing back against what is popular and then saying, hey, do this instead. And that's effective marketing, but it doesn't always do the viewer due diligence and do them a service.
Completely. Yeah. And this field has been around long enough, especially around long enough without a paradigm shift, a meaningful one that has contributed to amateur lifters doing better, professional lifters doing better. The numbers are not going up because training has gotten better. The numbers are going up because we have a bigger talent pool and a lot more prevalence of really harsh compounds. That's its popularity mixed with a lot of other stuff. If you look at the training templates of the top 100, top 1,000, whatever you want to, across any class, you are going to see training styles that are not more intelligent or more thought out than they were in the 1970s. Like really, you're going to find that. So I automatically interpret anything that is new or contrarian as having to obviously be kind of gimmick based. And I had a good buddy who was, and actually I'm probably going to have him on at some point in the future. Joe Buckley was a good friend of mine. He was the head strength coach at University of Redlands where we lived. And he would talk about it because he was a very good strongman, very good head on his shoulders with regards to practical training. And he would talk about how he would train athletes, but he was upfront. He's like, dude, the field of strength and conditioning is susceptible to the most gimmicky bullshit. And he's like, it fucks with your head because you're in a seminar and somebody has this PowerPoint where they're measuring like angles of flexion and how much sway is on your foot during a squat. And you sit there and you're like, have I been missing this? You're like, fuck, like, is there something to this? And you start, imposter syndrome sets in. You're like, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. And then you kind of come back to earth and you're like, no. And they can get away with that because athletes aren't rewarded for every extra unit of strength the way lifters are. So you already get people that are pre-selected for being talented because they are at D1 schools. And then you get a strength program, which just needs to get them a little stronger, get them in shape, and keep them injury-free, which is really easy to do. And the rest, it gives you a ton of leeway for fuckery to try to set yourself apart and to try to use functional movements. You got to do chaos training on a fucking Bosu ball. And it's like, well, those guys are still going to do well enough to perform in their sport. So it kind of makes you look really good. And it's unfortunate, but that's definitely something that you have to be aware of when you're trying to evaluate what works, what's cutting edge. And it's like anymore, nothing's really fucking cutting edge.
Yeah. Like they managed to turn elite athletes into elite athletes.
Shocking.
Wow, like good job. Yeah, amazing. Like maybe he got better, but like in a field sport, you don't necessarily know if they got better because of what you did. Whereas with powerlifting, you can tell, right? Like, because your lifting is the same as the goal, right? Your goal is also lifting. And so you can say, okay, well, my lift went up 20 kilos. Like, boom, there we go. Like, this probably had an effect. Like, it's a lot more controlled than a field sport. And so when I hear someone is like, oh, they train elite athletes. I've heard people attacking me saying, like, which elite athletes have you trained? Or like, have you worked with professional sports teams? I'm like, that's not maybe the metric. Like, oh, this guy trained for the Mets. Who of you? Like, that means you're nothing. Like, yeah, well, that doesn't mean everything. For sure.
It's a lot easier to train elite athletes than most people think. Like, it really is, especially if you live in a populated area. I'm good friends with some guys that run House of Power, Nick Romero, and Casey Garrison trains out of there as well. He's a heavyweight pro strongman. Nick trains a bunch of pro athletes because he operates out of Westminster in kind of LA area. There's tens of millions of people around that area. And it's really, think about how many different facets there are of college and minor league and major league. There are literally thousands of potential athletes you could train in only so many gyms. So anyways, it's really easy to get to, and it is a good way to bump up your stats because they're good no matter what. And there are some people in the field who, like Terry Rady is a good example. The guy is an absolute nutcase on social media, but apparently he's a really good strongman coach, which I believe I've actually referred people to him. But the guy trains, he probably has over 100 clients, but he trains some of the best strongmen in the country. Like, if you look at the top few lists in any division, he has his hands in all of them, and they say he's effective, they say he's good, but you always have to scratch your chin and say, chicken or the egg? Is he really good at recruiting talent, and this is why he gets good results? Or is it his system is like that good that it sets you apart? And it's a really hard question to answer. From a sports standpoint, you would just have to look at a team that is objectively stronger than every other team and wins because of it. And I am unaware of any method, any coaching approach that you can hang a Super Bowl championship on, or that you can hang a Heisman Trophy on, or anything like that. So, and yeah, that fuels all of that. That fuels all of that uncertainty, all of that bullshit.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like the athlete's belief in the program is, I would say, on par with the actual program. Within reason, as long as it's not like a complete dog shit program. But it's like, if it's a reasonable program, as long as the athlete believes in it, and they say like, okay, I'm going to do this, like, oh, I got this program from this coach, and this coach has also coached this person who did this. Like, once you get some athletes, and the new athletes believe in the system even more,
Sure.
Even if the system is nothing really special. So like, belief is hugely powerful, and maybe the coaches realize what they're doing, maybe they don't, but that's certainly a factor that plays into it. I mean, placebo is huge. It's absolutely massive. And if someone works harder on an okay program, that might be better than like a slightly better program on paper, But then the athlete's like, yeah, I don't know who wrote this. Like, I just got this off of Reddit or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that's something to factor.
All of the things that make this so hard to quantify on paper. There are so many things that you almost have to rely on intuitive interpretation of just from soaking it up over the years. I think it's about that time. This actually went longer than I thought it would. This is a good talk. I really appreciate having you on, man. Do you have a website you want to direct people to?
Yeah, I have my book is on verityfit.com. So VERITYFIT.com. And then yeah, on social media, it's just my name, Geoffrey Verity Schofield. And yeah, that's it.
Excellent. All right, check out his book Sweat either on Amazon or at his website. Very nice website, by the way. I've scrolled by it before, so I'm jealous of your design. I got to take some notes from you. But thanks so much for coming on, man. We got to do this again. Check out Geoffrey on his YouTube channel. Check him out on his website. Check out his book. Thank you, everybody, for stopping by. Until next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.